Hey friends. So hopefully you were thinking a little bit about Italy before you started watching and maybe remembering that Italy switched sides at the beginning of World War One and in an effort to be on the winning side. And maybe you remembered that Italy didn't have a lot of casualties compared to the other nations. Um, but you have to kind of think about it from Italy's perspective. And Italians feel that they did have a lot of losses. It was about 3% of their population, but it's always really painful, these things, because it's mostly young men and people they really needed for the functioning of their economy. This is a picture of Italian soldiers coming back from the war right after World War One. There's a couple of things you can notice in this picture. One is look at the mood here. Is this like a celebration? Are people happy? Are they feeling victorious? Not. um, Italy didn't get a lot of respect at the Treaty of Versailles. They didn't win new colonies. They didn't have huge gains from their investment in the war. Um, also, as you can see here, look at the number of carts that are drawn by horses. There's barely anything that has a motor in this picture. And that should remind you that Italy was really not an industrial nation. This is practically a dirt road coming through this city here. Italy was a fairly poor and still very agricultural community. So, a couple things to know about Italy. In this picture, you can see um, women working in the fields in Italy right after the war. And one thing to notice is just that they're women and they're older. And this is because the economy was really dependent on women and older people because of the war. But the other thing to notice is, again, no tractors, no machines. This is a pre-industrial society for the most part. And so the brand new democracy that was Italy's government had very little to show for its involvement in the war and was perceived by the people anyway as being really weak and not delivering any real results. And people's lifestyle and um, economic situation wasn't great. One of the things that led to is that a lot of people in Italy right after the war were interested in what was going on in Russia and the socialist revolution and thinking about the idea that they could have more if they took from the rich and gave to the poor. And a wave of socialist activism happened in Italy. So in this picture, you see a bunch of folks who have taken over their factory and blockaded themselves in to keep the owner out. Here's their manifesto. This was happening all over Italy. Notice the hammer and sickle, the symbol of communism and socialism. Also notice the determined looks on their faces and the fact that they have weapons, which suggests probably that they're former soldiers. Um, so the feeling all over Italy was, let's take over our workplaces, let's run our own show, and let's distribute the wealth amongst the working people. 2 years of activism resulted in a lot of socialists being elected in the government, a lot of businesses being converted to co-ops, and from the point of view of the wealthy owning class in Italy, this was freak out. Like, what? Oh my gosh, we're losing control. The answer was this man, Benito Mussolini. Um, Benito Mussolini was a socialist, a journalist, and he did a little bit of time as a soldier in World War One. But don't romanticize that. He was just a line soldier. He didn't earn any of these medals that you see in this picture. This is his thing. Was he liked to dress up all military and decorate himself with things he hadn't earned. Um, his line was building a gang of guys they called black shirts that would beat up socialists in exchange for cash from the owners of the factories. And he took a gang name. Here's this propaganda poster. It says El Duque, a duke. Um, and he began promoting himself as this kind of father figure for the nation, someone who would take care of Italy and bring Italy some measure of comfort and ease and order out of what may have seemed to a lot of people like chaos. This is a election campaign poster for Mussolini's group. Check it out. It asks you to say yes, 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 yes. To what? Look at this face in the middle. They were really selling this idea of, you might think of it as tough love. Like you need somebody to boss you around. You need somebody to tell you what to do. Italy needs a stern, firm hand that will, make the bad people suffer and turn the economy better by force if it has to. So just keep thinking about that. I'm going to try to describe the ideology that Mussolini developed, which was called fascism. So, what is fascism? I'm going to get a little technical. Hang in there. Fascism is an ideology, it's a belief system. And fascists believe a couple of things. They believe that their nation is better than all the other nations. That's called nationalism. But they're also into this idea that there's only some people inside the nation who are truly patriots, who are truly members of that nation. So there's hate towards other nations, but there's also hate towards specific groups inside of the nation. And fascists will argue that there are some groups of people that are better based on religion or race or other background issues. You might recognize that as social Darwinism, the idea that some people are just destined to be successful and others are inferior. Fascists don't believe in democracy, which they see as a weak way of doing things, but support the idea of a strong dictator who can pull everyone together by force. And finally, well, not quite finally, but finally, fascists believe that the strong should dominate and control others. And so they will argue for starting a fight, attacking, beginning the military effort, always pushing the window of what can be done, and including taking over other countries with the military. And lastly, fascists argue that people have to give up their individual interests and goals and thoughts and focus on following a dictator blindly. So you might have met somebody who has one or two of these ideas, but a fascist is someone who's combining this kind of thinking. It really takes more than three to make a fascist. The trick here is, how would you recognize a fascist if they hadn't yet become a dictator or started taking over other countries? What does a baby fascist who doesn't yet have a lot of power look like and sound like? Maybe it sounds like someone who's always pumping up their country and talking about people who are inferior and who doesn't have dictatorship powers, but is constantly taking every opportunity to diss the government that is in power, to diss democratic leaders. Maybe it doesn't look like someone who has control of an army or can take over other countries yet, but someone who talks about it and who glorifies military action and who glorifies violence and encourages violence. So this is what you're trying to be on the lookout for. Mussolini was the originator of the word fascism, even though those ideas have been around for a long time and you've heard them before, and they've been combined in the same way before. Mussolini named fascism. He named it after this thing called the fascists. So here's the basic idea. Back in the day, people used to make axes. And the way they make the axe is they would take a hard object and smash it in between right directly into a wooden stick. The problem with this is that sometimes the wooden stick just busts open down the side from the pressure of that insertion. So a smart farmer will take a bunch of littler sticks and wrap them around the handle of the axe and tie them on. Those little sticks are called fasces in Italian and or Latin, and so this is a fascist. And think about it like a metaphor, right? The idea of fascism is that all of the people, the weak, small people, are supposed to band together and stick with the dictator, and that will make them strong as a nation. Some of the things that are fascism might sound similar to some of the things that some countries do when they're doing communism or socialism, but I just want to point out that fascism is not the same thing as communism or socialism. It's true that Stalin was a communist who was really into dictatorship, and it's true that other countries have been interested in dictatorship and socialism at the same time, but that doesn't make fascism the same as socialism. One thing that's true about socialists is that they believe in this idea of equality between all people, and that people are entitled to equal results from their work. That's totally different than the fascist idea that there are some groups that are better than others. Another thing that communists and socialists almost always believe is this idea that eventually there could be a worldwide revolution, and that working people have the same interests wherever they are around the world and deserve to be joined together. That's not the same as fascists who preach that war is a good thing and that some particular group should dominate and control the rest of the world. Also, historically, the fascists in Italy and Germany were formed as a group specifically for the purpose of fighting against socialists and advocating for capitalism. And that's true even today. So there's just not that much overlap between fascists and socialists. So what Mussolini did is he created this idea of fascism, and then he began to preach that as a sort of theory that would bind together his gang, the Black Shirts. The Black Shirts had an adult wing and a child wing. Here you see children pretending to be soldiers and learning the ideology, being indoctrinated into the idea of fascism. When adults got together, they were supposed to wear their black shirts and go out and beat up communists or anybody else who said that fascism was a bad idea. The culmination of all this violence and gang building was in 1922 when Mussolini marched into Rome with about 1,000 fascist foot soldiers, and he marched to the palace of the king. Italy had a democracy, but the king had a sort of minor role like in Britain, and Mussolini demanded that the king make him the dictator of Italy. So the king didn't exactly have that power, but he went ahead and did it, which shows how much people were either afraid of Mussolini or interested in the idea of a stronger leader. And then Mussolini proceeded to destroy the parliament and become the dictator of Italy, essentially a coup d'etat in 1922. This is a painting by Diego Rivera, the Mexican painter that we've seen before, talking about Mussolini. Notice the fascist salute. Notice the Italian flag and the fascists in the background. Diego Rivera wanted you to know that the Catholic Church supported Mussolini's takeover. This is actually the corrupt deal that got the Catholic Church, the Vatican, and their independent sort of country within a country, in exchange for looking the other way while Mussolini did the terrible things that he did. Diego Rivera also wants you to notice the similarity between fascism in Italy and groups in the United States like the KKK, which you can see here. And also you see a British industrialist in the background. These are little hints from Diego Rivera that fascism was already a worldwide phenomenon, even if it didn't have that name. And this bottom corner here is particularly interesting. This is Giacomo Matteo, who was a socialist leader in the Italian parliament and was murdered by fascist thugs as part of the consolidation of Mussolini's power. So by 1936, Mussolini had total control in Italy and was looking to expand his empire and build back what he called the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. You might notice the similarity between that and, say, making America great again, but I wouldn't have said that. I couldn't say that. So one of the things that Mussolini set his eyes on was Ethiopia, otherwise known as Abyssinia, which Italy had lost the opportunity to take over during the scramble for Africa. You might remember this story because the Ethiopians managed to keep their independence. Italy was not able to take them as a colony, and he was mad about that, and he thought they should go back and take Ethiopia, which in fact they did. In this picture, you can see Eritrean boys doing the fascist salute and some leaders from Italy here. It was a bloody year-long war. The Italians used poison gas against the Ethiopians, but eventually the Ethiopian emperor had to go into exile, and Ethiopia became a colony of Italy. And that put Italy in a position to begin to attack other countries like Albania and Europe and begin their plan to take over the world, which is the beginning of World War II in Europe. I want to encourage you to look at the other video that I did about Ethiopia and to learn more about what was going on for them. So check that out.